In the second part of this lecture, we're going to analyze the second type of risk associated with innovations in ecosystem. This is called the co-innovation risk, and it will be illustrated by another case study about the beginning of the third generation telephony in the last decade. Mobile telephony had met with an incredible success toward the end of the 20th century. At the beginning of 21st century, the diffusion of mobile telephony had kind of stalled. In fact, most people in the Western country owned a mobile phone, and hence source of growth had become more difficult to identify. The industry was looking for double-digit growth, and that double-digit growth was a perception at the time could come from the transition from voice only to voice plus data, and clearly data in that case meant the internet. Transferring the internet from computers to mobile phones was a very difficult task. But the expectations were equally high. In fact, when several states in the West auctioned the licenses for operating on the 3G standard, the standard that would enable data to be relatively fastly transmitted over the infrastructure, the cost of those licenses were absolutely incredible. Everybody was stunned by the fact that in the UK there was spent 22 billion pounds just to be able to operate in that field. In Germany it was 30 billion. So that was a huge amount of money even before you start building the infrastructure, which would be at least as much as expensive, which was even before, of course, the first cent in profit would flow in. But the race was high, and it was expected, as the economists wrote, that those two technologies, mobile phones and the internet, would open an incredible period of profitability for the industries involved. Nokia was the dominating player in the design and manufacture of mobile phones. So Nokia joined the fray and managed in a relatively short time to design what the Business Week defined as the most complex consumer electronics device ever designed. Nokia executed the internal strategy brilliantly as Michelin did. But Nokia expected to profit from the massive investment in design of 3G phone. They expected to sell 300 millions only by 2002, the first year introduction. What they sold was just 1/100th of that. So Nokia clearly was successful in terms of executing an internal strategy, but failed, at least failed in the initial years of diffusion of 3G telephony. And the question is why? Why did they fail? According to Ron Adler, Nokia failed because instead of adopting a wide lens of looking at the ecosystem involved in innovation, they only looked at their internal executions. That approach had been successful in the previous decades of Nokia's operation, but the industry with 3G had changed. Why had the industry changed? Essentially because the introduction of 3G depended on other complementary technologies, on co-innovations. And those co-innovations were essentially three. First, in order to access the internet over the tiny monitors of the mobile phones of the time, this is 5 years before the first iPhone will be introduced, you really needed software to reformat web pages in a format comfortable for the eyes looking to a mobile phone. Second, you needed to know what type of web pages customers were actually accessing in order to build them consequently. This required developing hardware and software. And third, of course, the permanent problem of piracy over the internet, protection of content, which required the development of property rights, in this case for the digital arena, digital rights management to prevent piracy. What Nokia did is to follow the traditional ecosystem approach and not to consider the new ecosystem of 3G phone. So what was the traditional ecosystem? Traditional ecosystem, the company, in this case the handset manufacturing, had to coordinate the supply chain in order to align the delivery of components, assemble the products, and then sell it to the operators or to the retailers. In the new system, they still had to do that. On top, they had to coordinate an array of complementary innovations without which the initial innovation would be partially useless. Now, Nokia, of course, knew that the success of 3G phone depended on co-innovations. They just expected the industry, the rest of the industry, meaning the developers of the new technologies, to follow through at the same pace of Nokia, and they didn't. So when the 3G Nokia phones hit the market, those complementary technologies were simply not there. And that slowed down dramatically the diffusion of 3G phones over the years 2002, 2005. So the ecosystem approach requires not only the identification of the complementary technologies, if you want, the co-innovations. It requires a careful looking at the timing of the introduction of those co-innovations. And this is what Nokia failed to do, because according to Adner, it adopted a narrow lens rather than the wide lens that the ecosystem required. So in a situation of co-innovation risk, what matters is the temporal alignment of the subparts of the whole project. Let's say that we are dealing with a situation in which 4 partners are developing 4 parts for technologies that altogether constitute or should constitute a successful proposition for a potential customer. Let's say that the probability of success of each technology is about 85%. What is the overall probability of success? Is it the average, or is it the multiplication of them? If it were the average, we would be looking at a situation whereby the plus of one project might compensate the minus of another project, let's say another technology part of the whole package. But no, in a co-innovation risk, what matters is that all of them have to succeed at the same time in order for the whole project to succeed. So in this case, what matters is not the average. There's no compensation whether A achieves more than B. What matters is that A, B, C, and D have all to succeed. So in this case, what matters is not the average, but the multiplication. So even though the 4 projects might have a relatively high probability, the overall probability of success of the project is in this case about 50%. And clearly, the more projects, sub-project you add, the higher the probability of failure, although each of the single sub-project might have a relatively high probability of success. So notice that what matters in this case is not only if it can be done, but when it can be done. The situation of co-innovation risk is similar, but not exactly the same as in the situation we discussed in the previous part when we looked at Michelin, the adoption value chain risk. In the adoption value chain risk, we identified the fact that all the parties have to sequentially adopt in order for the innovation to be successful in the market. Here we are saying that all the parties have to develop at the same time the same innovation in order to be for the product or service to be successful in the market. To control is the co-innovation and the adoption chain risk. Conclude. As I said, this part comes largely from the book by Adner, The White Lens. If you look over the internet, you will find of course, you can get the book from our library or from Amazon, but you also find shorter description of the theory. You should put the ecosystemic risk together with the discussion on platforms and in general open innovation. They form an integrated whole.